output, and I have to look for all the different types of conditions and whatnot.
And just read the code. It takes like 10 minutes a file, and I can tell you if they all work.
That's what he's saying. He has to actually read the code.
I will hire you next time to to be my grader.
There you go. Do you accept bribes?
Oh yeah, certainly.
Okay, so I'm starting the recorder. Let me make sure the audio portion is also recording, because sometimes it's just good to double check. Has anyone checked out the other ones? I mean, have you guys checked out the playlist that's already uploaded from Monday?
It works.
It works? Okay, excellent. So I can also see that my script is getting the input from the proper microphone, so that's good. So we can, well, it doesn't hurt to double check, because otherwise you'll be watching a silent movie.
Hey, you can put a cheesy piano score in the background.
With Pepsi chords, not piano, Pepsi.
Nah.
Okay, so what I want to do first is to talk about the solution of Socket 4. This is our last class meeting, the last lecture of the entire semester. And then when we have time, I can show you the type of questions that I will ask, but I did not have time to prepare questions for this class for the practice final. But I can show you what I'm planning to do with CISP310, and the format of the test will be pretty much the same. So let's go ahead and take a look at the solution. Let's see, we go to files. I actually uploaded the solution yesterday already. Yeah, where is it? Okay, go to the class first. Go. After I made sure there's no emergency whatsoever at home to handle, walk the dog and stuff like that, it was 11:30 p.m. already. But then I got no distractions after that. So I worked on this for 4 hours and it was done.
Cool.
The key is to watch Doctor Who at the same time. I think that really helped.
Probably.
No, you write your best code when you're sleep deprived.
Did you go back in time? Or forward in time?
Forward and back and mess around with time. Yep. So let's save that to today's folder. And so you guys will have a copy of that too. I really think that it is a good idea to review that if you have the time to do it. It's almost like preparing for the final exam when you read that code, or at least annotate it and understand how it works. That applies doubly to people who cannot get your own version to work, because that way you can actually see how a solution works. Obviously, my solution is not the only possible solution. It's just one of the many solutions. 453, 2010, 05. Should have a macro to say today.
There you go.
Parts, DVF, socket 4. Okay, so included in the tar file is the Git repository. I made 11 commits, during the 4 hours, at important points. So if you want to look at, exactly the process of changing socket 3 to socket 4, you can actually look at the history or the log of the Git repository. And that will give you a pretty good idea of how I worked on the program, which may or may not be useful, because everybody has a different way of, working on a programming project. But, just in case someone is interested, not just at the final solution, but also look at the process, the steps that I took to get the homework done, that's also available. And let's go to socket 4. At this point, socket 4, the source code is already at the head of the repository. In other words, this is the solution. This is the final version of the solution. But you can always, go use a Git, especially use diff tool to help you go all the way back to the first one and then look at, how that one got changed to become the second version, and then how we go from the second version to the third, and so on. Does anyone want to know the command to do that? It's pretty. I just figured that out. So it's called diff tool. Yep, go ahead.
Look, there's also a command called git k, which is like a GUI representation of
the tree. Yep. It's not installed. Yep. But diff tool works, it actually works also in a dumb terminal. In other words, if you have a PuTTY terminal open, diff tool would also work. It has color coding and all kinds of good stuff like that. Then you can supply, some parameters. If you don't supply any parameters, it would just use all the defaults. I usually do a -w, lowercase w, which means ignore changes in white spaces. Okay, so indentation change will not be shown as actual changes to the lines. So that way, if I change indentation, it's not going to show up in the diff. And then what you do is you supply the commit points. Head refers to the current version. The head of the repository means the most updated commit. So if you don't want to do that, you can always go back in time. The tilde symbol, this is actually the tilde symbol. It's a little bit harder to see. It's not actually up there. But the tilde symbol followed by a number is basically saying, okay, which parent, up to how many levels of parents do we want to refer to? So in this case, it's basically saying we want to look at the grand parent of the current head. So we are going back in time. The higher the number, the further back in time you're looking into. In this case, the repository only has 11 commits, so that's why we can only go 11 times back in history. And you can supply the second version or the second commit. You can always just specify head, which means we're comparing the very first version to the current version, which means a huge amount of changes, which may not be very helpful because the program has changed so much that you can't really see the actual changes. It will just be like everything is different. So instead of doing this, you can say, okay, let's just compare the one that is one step after this one. Okay, so we're comparing the original version with the first commit of the entire tree or of the entire path or history of commits. Then you specify -- to separate the commit identifier, which is the head tilde symbol, from the actual file that you want to compare. So we have socket4.c as the source file. So this is the command line that I use to take a look at, to see the differences between two specific versions. Now the difference between a diff tool and a diff is if you specify diff, the output is intended mostly for machine readability. Okay, so if you want to create a patch file so that you can send a patch file to other people to update the program, diff will give you the proper output. Diff tool, on the other hand, will actually invoke vimdiff or gvimdiff depending on whether you're using a GUI environment or not. So it will actually give you a more graphical representation side by side, so it's easier to actually see the differences between the revisions. So we'll go ahead and try that. I'm pretty sure get is installed. So in this case, the command detects that I have I'm running inside the GUI, so that's why it automatically picks gvimdiff instead of just vimdiff in this case. Gvimdiff is the GDK version of vimdiff, which means it has its own full GUI environment built into it. So once we do that, it will start this up. And right here, let me see if I can change the font size. Select font. Slightly bigger one, that. So here we have a side-by-side comparison of the two